David Harris, 40, a single dad in a wrinkled shirt, stood before the CEO's desk as whispers circled. One mistake on a report meant the end of his job and the home he fought to keep for his daughter. As the CEO raised her pen to sign his termination, a small voice rang out. His 10-year-old daughter, clutching a sketchbook, stepped forward. "Stay. This touching story will break and heal your heart." David Harris had been working late nights for 8 months straight, ever since his wife Sarah died from cancer, and left him to raise their 10-year-old daughter Sophie alone while managing a mortgage, medical bills, and the daily challenges of single parenthood. His job as a project coordinator at Morrison & Associates was the only thing standing between them and financial ruin. But the pressure of balancing work responsibilities with being Sophie's sole caregiver was taking its toll. That Tuesday morning, everything that could go wrong did. Sophie's babysitter called in sick. The school had an unexpected closure due to a broken heating system, and David couldn't afford to take another personal day after using most of his leave during Sarah's illness. With no other options, he brought Sophie to the office, settling her at a small table in the break room with coloring books and quiet activities. Exhausted from another sleepless night spent reviewing budgets and project timelines, David submitted the quarterly financial report that would determine funding for the company's biggest client. Only later did he realize his fatigue had caused him to transpose critical numbers, creating discrepancies that made the company appear to be over budget by nearly $50,000. The mistake was discovered during the morning executive meeting, where Victoria Lane, the CEO known throughout the industry for her ruthless efficiency and zero-tolerance policy for errors, reviewed the report with her senior staff. Word spread quickly through the office corridors. David Harris had made the kind of fundamental mistake that corporations couldn't forgive, especially not during economic uncertainty when every client relationship was precious. When David was summoned to Victoria's corner office, hushed whispers followed his path through the maze of cubicles. "He's finished," someone murmured. "Poor guy, but this is exactly the kind of thing that gets you blacklisted in this industry." Victoria's office reflected her reputation. Stark, efficient, decorated with awards that testified to her ability to make tough decisions that prioritized bottom-line results over personal considerations. She had built Morrison & Associates from a regional firm into a national powerhouse by never allowing sentiment to interfere with business necessity. "Mr. Harris," Victoria said, without looking up from the report spread across her mahogany desk, "this error has potentially cost us our largest client. The financial projections you provided were presented to their board this morning. They're questioning our competency." David stood in his wrinkled shirt, the same one he'd worn yesterday because laundry had been postponed for more urgent tasks like helping Sophie with homework and preparing her dinner, knowing that his next words might determine whether they would have a home next month. "Ms. Lane, I take full responsibility. I know there's no excuse for this kind of mistake, but You're right," Victoria interrupted, reaching for her pen with the decisive movement that had terminated dozens of careers. "There is no excuse. I'm sorry, Mr. Harris, but I have no choice but to." That's when Sophie appeared in the doorway. The 10-year-old had wandered from the break room, drawn by the sound of her father's voice and the instinctive understanding that something important was happening. She clutched her sketchbook against her chest, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. Her father looking smaller than she'd ever seen him, the stern woman behind the desk holding a pen like a weapon. "Please don't fire my daddy," Sophie said, her voice cutting through the corporate formality with the simple honesty that only children possess. "He works so hard. He works for me." The room froze. Victoria's pen stopped moving. David's face flushed with embarrassment and protective love for his daughter, who had just witnessed his professional humiliation. Sophie stepped further into the office, seemingly oblivious to the breach of corporate protocol her presence represented. The executives who had been preparing to witness David's termination shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to react to a child in a space reserved for adult decisions about careers and consequences. With the determined innocence that children bring to situations adults have complicated with rules and procedures, Sophie approached Victoria's imposing desk and held out her sketchbook. "I drew this for you," she said simply, opening to a page covered in crayon drawings that told the story of her life with her father. The sketch showed a man in work clothes fixing a leaky faucet, making sandwiches shaped like hearts, holding a small girl's hand while walking to school. Each simple drawing captured moments that corporate performance reviews never measured, the daily acts of love that sustained a family of two. "He's my hero," Sophie whispered, her voice carrying the absolute conviction that comes from experiencing unconditional love every day. "When Mommy got sick, he took care of both of us. Now he takes care of just me, but he never gets tired of it, even when he's really, really tired." Victoria stared at the drawings, her professional composure wavering as she processed this unexpected glimpse into the life of someone she had been prepared to dismiss as merely an incompetent employee. The artwork revealed a reality she had never considered, that the man standing before her wasn't just a worker who had made a mistake, but a father whose entire world revolved around the child now defending him with fierce loyalty. For the first time in the 5 years since she had assumed leadership of Morrison and Associates, Victoria found herself uncertain about a personnel decision. The boardroom strategies and profit margin calculations that usually guided her choices seemed inadequate for processing what was happening in her office. "Sophie, sweetie, you shouldn't be here," David said gently, his embarrassment at the situation warring with pride at his daughter's brave attempt to protect him. "Ms. Lane and I need to finish our conversation." But Victoria held up her hand, studying the child who had transformed a routine termination into something more complex and emotionally challenging. "It's all right, Mr. Harris. I'd like to hear what Sophie has to say." Later that afternoon, after the other executives had left and the office had grown quiet, Victoria called David back to her office. This time the conversation was different, less formal, more searching, as she found herself genuinely curious about the life circumstances that had led to his mistake. "Tell me about your situation at home," Victoria said, her tone softer than David had ever heard it. "I want to understand what's been affecting your work performance." David hesitated, then spoke honestly about the impossible juggling act his life had become. Working late to prove his dedication while trying to be present for Sophie, managing household responsibilities that had once been shared, struggling with grief while maintaining stability for a child who had already lost so much. "I'm drowning," he admitted, the words coming out with relief at finally being able to acknowledge the truth he had been hiding behind professional competence. "But I can't give up. Sophie depends on me, and she's the most important thing in my life. I know I made a serious mistake, and I know the company has to protect its interests, but I need you to know that I'm not normally careless. I'm just trying to do everything alone." Victoria listened with growing recognition of struggles she had never experienced personally, but could now see clearly. Her own path to success had been built on single-minded focus and the luxury of not having responsibilities that competed with professional demands. For the first time in years, she felt something crack through the armor of corporate efficiency that had protected her from emotional complications. A recognition that the numbers on spreadsheets represented real people with complex lives and competing priorities. "Your daughter is remarkable," Victoria said finally. "She's lucky to have a father who loves her so completely." "I'm the lucky one," David replied, his voice thick with emotion. "She's what keeps me going when everything else feels impossible." As David prepared to leave, expecting that their conversation was merely a kind gesture, before the inevitable termination, Victoria made a decision that surprised even her. "Take tomorrow off," she said. "Spend it with Sophie. We'll discuss your future with the company when you come back. Keep watching, because what happens next will prove how one small voice can change everything." Victoria's decision to delay David's termination created immediate ripples throughout Morrison and Associates' executive structure. By the next morning, 3 senior board members had requested urgent meetings to discuss what they perceived as a dangerous precedent that could undermine the company's reputation for maintaining high professional standards. "Victoria, I understand that seeing the man's child was emotionally affecting," said Robert Sterling, the company's longest-serving board member, during an emergency session in the conference room. "But we can't allow personal sentiment to override business judgment. If we excuse this kind of fundamental error, what message does that send to our other employees?" Margaret Chen, the chief financial officer, supported Sterling's position with characteristic bluntness. "The client has already expressed concerns about our quality control processes. Keeping Harris sends the wrong signal about our commitment to excellence. We need to demonstrate that mistakes have consequences, regardless of personal circumstances." Victoria found herself in the unfamiliar position of defending a decision based on factors that couldn't be quantified in quarterly reports or performance metrics. The logical part of her mind acknowledged their concerns. David's error had been significant, and corporate culture demanded consistent application of standards regardless of individual circumstances. But Sophie's drawings remained spread across Victoria's desk, a visual reminder of complexities that her board's analysis didn't account for. The artwork depicted a reality where professional competence was only one measure of a person's value, where dedication could manifest in ways that performance reviews never captured. Meanwhile, David spent his unexpected day off helping Sophie with a science project about butterflies. Their small kitchen table covered with construction paper wings and research books from the library. As they worked together, Sophie's innocent questions about their future revealed how much she had been absorbing despite his efforts to shield her from financial anxieties. "Daddy, are we going to lose our house?" Sophie asked while carefully cutting orange and black paper for monarch butterfly wings. "I heard you talking on the phone about money again." David's heart broke as he realized how his stress had been affecting the child he was trying to protect. "I don't know, sweetheart, but whatever happens, we'll face it together, okay? You're the most important thing in my life, and I'm going to take care of you no matter what." That evening, Victoria made an unprecedented decision. She drove to David's address, a modest duplex in a neighborhood where children's bicycles were chained to front porches and families gathered on small lawns for barbecues that didn't require catering services. Victoria's expensive sedan looked conspicuously out of place as she parked outside David's home, but her discomfort with the unfamiliar environment was overshadowed by genuine curiosity about how people lived when corporate success wasn't their defining characteristic. The modest apartment revealed a life built around love rather than luxury. Secondhand furniture that had been carefully maintained, walls decorated with Sophie's artwork instead of expensive prints, a kitchen table that served as homework station, art studio, and family gathering place. Victoria watched as David helped Sophie with her butterfly project. His patience infinite despite obvious exhaustion, his attention completely focused on his daughter's questions about metamorphosis and migration patterns. The scene challenged every assumption she had made about work-life balance and professional priorities. "She's everything to me," David said quietly while Sophie arranged her completed butterflies in a shoebox display. "Losing Sarah showed me that life can change in an instant. I never want Sophie to doubt that she's loved, even when everything else feels uncertain." The following morning's board meeting became a defining moment in Victoria's leadership. Facing colleagues who expected her to prioritize corporate interests over individual circumstances, she found herself articulating values she hadn't realized she possessed. "David Harris made a mistake," Victoria acknowledged, her voice carrying new authority. "But this company has benefited from 3 years of his dedication, his innovative problem-solving, and his commitment to quality work. Are we really going to destroy a good man's career because exhaustion caused one error in judgment?" "It's not about being cruel," Sterling argued. "It's about maintaining standards that keep us competitive. Our standards should include recognizing that our employees are human beings with complex lives," Victoria replied. "David Harris is raising a child alone while grieving his wife's death and maintaining professional competence that has contributed to this company's success. If we can't show compassion for circumstances like that, what kind of organization are we?" The room fell silent as board members processed their CEO's unexpected challenge to corporate culture that had prioritized efficiency over empathy for decades. Victoria realized she was staking her own reputation on a decision that might be viewed as weak leadership rather than strong moral judgment. But Sophie's voice echoed in her memory. "He's my hero." Some truths were more important than quarterly profit reports. The boardroom tension reached its peak as Victoria faced down colleagues whose approval had shaped her career for the past decade. Her next words would either establish a new direction for Morrison and Associates or potentially damage her own standing within the corporate hierarchy she had worked years to ascend. "David Harris stays," Victoria announced, her voice carrying the decisive authority that had made her successful but now served a different purpose. Not because of pity or sentimentality, but because this company needs people like him, people who understand that excellence isn't just about avoiding mistakes, but about maintaining dedication under impossible circumstances. Gas rippled through the conference room as board members processed this unprecedented challenge to their established protocols. But Victoria continued before dissent could organize. True strength isn't perfection under ideal conditions. True strength is refusing to give up when life becomes overwhelming, continuing to show up for the people who depend on you, maintaining integrity when everything else is falling apart. Sterling's objection was swift. Victoria, you're setting a dangerous precedent. I'm setting a human precedent, she interrupted. David Harris has demonstrated exactly the kind of character we should value in our employees. His mistake was caused by circumstances that would challenge anyone's performance. But his response has been to take responsibility and continue fighting for his family. That's the kind of person I want representing this company. When David returned to work the next day, expecting to clear out his desk and face an uncertain future, he instead found Victoria waiting with a decision that would reshape not just his career, but his understanding of what corporate leadership could represent. Mr. Harris, Victoria said, extending her hand in greeting rather than dismissal, I want to discuss your future with this company. Your error has been noted and addressed, but your value as an employee and as a person far outweighs one mistake made under extraordinary stress. David's overwhelming gratitude was matched by Victoria's own surprise at the satisfaction she felt in making a decision based on values rather than just metrics. Thank you, Ms. Lane. I promise you won't regret giving me this chance. Don't thank me, Victoria replied, thinking of the small girl whose drawings had challenged her assumptions about success and strength. Thank your daughter. She reminded me what leadership should actually look like. The changes that followed extended far beyond David's continued employment. Victoria found herself reevaluating corporate policies that had never accounted for the reality that employees were human beings, with complex lives requiring flexibility and understanding, rather than just compliance with rigid expectations. Weeks later, Victoria accepted Sophie's invitation to dinner at their modest duplex, sitting at the small wooden table that had become the heart of their home. The evening was a revelation, laughter replacing the corporate formality that had defined Victoria's social interactions for years. Genuine conversation about art projects and school friends, rather than quarterly projections and market analysis. Sophie's butterfly project had won first place in her school science fair, and she proudly explained monarch migration patterns to Victoria with the enthusiasm that made every topic fascinating when viewed through a child's curiosity. You know what I learned from studying butterflies? Sophie asked while showing Victoria her ribbon and display board. Sometimes the most beautiful things come from going through really hard changes. Caterpillars have to basically disappear to become butterflies. Victoria smiled at the wisdom contained in that innocent observation, recognizing her own transformation from someone who measured success purely through corporate achievement to someone who understood that the most important victories were often invisible to shareholders and board members. As the evening wound down and Victoria prepared to return to her upscale apartment, Sophie approached with another drawing, this one showing 3 figures around a dinner table, all of them smiling. This is us, Sophie explained. You're part of our family now, because families are people who care about each other, not just people who live in the same house. David watched his daughter's generous heart extend to someone who had held their future in her hands. Understanding that Sophie's capacity for forgiveness and inclusion was teaching both adults lessons about grace they had never learned in professional settings. A year later, Victoria would look back on that moment as the beginning of her real education in leadership. Not the kind taught in business schools or corporate seminars, but the kind that comes from recognizing that the most important decisions are often about who we choose to be when other people's lives depend on our choices. David's career flourished under leadership that valued character alongside competence. And Sophie grew up understanding that sometimes the smallest voices can create the biggest changes when they speak from love rather than fear. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Our Heart Stories for more emotional tales of love, courage, and the second chances that transform ordinary moments into extraordinary acts of grace.